Mr. Martinez, we show you registered as Justin Martinez, Latino Justice PRLDEF, and yourself, and you're against the bill. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Justin Martinez. I am the Justice Advocate Coordinator for the Southwest Region with Latino Justice PRLDEF. And thank you for the opportunity to testify in opposition for House Bill 2017. So, clearly intoxication and manslaughter is a very serious issue and one that should have consequences and meaningful pathways towards accountability for those actions. However, we feel that this bill takes the wrong approach for a lot of the reasons that were just stated by tying sentencing immigration to that rather than focusing on solutions that would provide meaningful long-term public safety solutions to this issue. And I also wanted to point out again, just to reiterate that this will effectively create a two-tier justice system where one person convicted of intoxication manslaughter may be eligible for certain alternatives to incarceration in which they may be able to have access to more treatment, more community-based treatment, as opposed to someone who will not, again, based solely on their immigration status, forcing them to serve a mandatory minimum, essentially, of 10 years before becoming pro-eligibility. I think, in addition, mandatory minimums do little to deter crime. I think there's obviously research that suggests that having consequences or having the ability to get to have your liberty or freedom taken away can impact certain individuals' decisions, but that relies on assumptions that people act rationally, and assumptions that people sort of weigh those issues when in the commission of whatever it is that the actions that they're going to be doing. And so again, that's not to say that we shouldn't. I think the research is, I think it could be debated, I guess is what I'm saying. But I think there may be some other factors to consider, particularly around the person's attitudes, around maybe the person's social group, peer support influences, things like that, I think are also important factors when we're looking at trying to deter crime. But for those reasons, we are opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Are there any questions? At this time, the chair recognizes Representative Schatzline. For what purpose?
Ask a question.
Proceed.
So respectfully, don't you think it's a bit tone deaf when we're talking about someone who lost their life in this situation and someone who is in our country illegally to talk about other scenarios to integrate into a community when the reality is they've already broken the law to be in the community?
Sure. No, I think that's fair. And I'm certainly, we're not trying to be insensitive to the situation. I just think as someone, as myself, who's been a big victim of a lot of violence, but also who's unfortunately caused harm in my community, I would rather us focus on things that would give us the opportunities to have these difficult and hard conversations around what it means to not just address the incident at hand and essentially move that person into a prison cell, but have conversations around what is it that we as a community need to be doing to really try and do something more long-term when it comes to the issue of folks getting behind the wheel and driving while intoxicated.
And I'm open to that conversation. I think the reality is, though, we're talking about a bill that can provide justice for a family whose loved one was taken from them. And so I think what you're talking about really doesn't have to do with the legislation that's before us. I think, like I said, it's a bit tone deaf when we're talking about a bill that's going to provide justice for a family that can't otherwise get that justice. Their loved one's never coming back, and we're talking about, we've had an influx of millions of illegal aliens that have come across our border, and we're in a crisis right now, and we finally have that coming under control at our southern Texas border right now. But this is an action step that simply says, hey, we're going to deter crime from people who have already committed a crime to be here. And so I find it difficult to hear about alternative solutions when the reality is this legislation simply says, hey, there should be a minimum so we can deter this crime, especially amongst those who have already entered our country illegally.
Sure, and understood. I understand your point and would love to have more conversations around that. I just think sometimes we rely a little bit too much on the deterrent effect Again, that theory relies on a lot of assumptions that I think, particularly if we're talking about such a serious case as intoxication manslaughter, we're probably talking about someone who is dealing with much more than just the issue around their substance use. And I think we maybe need to have parallel conversations around what does accountability look like, but also what does it mean to, again, actually pursue long-term solutions that would prevent that person from committing that crime to begin with, but also things that are not as reactive, but maybe more on the preventative side to try and deter as much in the community as possible. I think that's what we're trying to get at, but I understand your point.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I got a couple questions for you. So how, and I appreciate the bill. My question to you is, how would you answer the question, this person's already committed multiple offenses. They came here illegally, right? They don't have a driver's license. But you have a driver's license in your pocket, I'm sure, don't you?
I do.
Okay. They probably don't have insurance, right? You have insurance in your pocket. So they show in total disregard for the law, in my view. How would you answer that? And now we have a family that's lost a loved one. And without making more harsh penalties or harsher penalties for people, because they obviously have no regard for our laws in this country. How would you answer that?
I mean, I think I would rely on comments I've already made. I mean, I think those are valid, and I think those should be considered. And I'm not trying to create an either-or situation here. I think I'm just trying to bring to the committee that I think we need to also be thinking more big picture when it comes to these issues. I mean, yes, like I mentioned, there needs to be consequences, and there definitely needs to be accountability. But I think that this particular issue here deserves much more attention and a much more broader conversation around what are the things that we really need to do, again, that I was talking with Rep. Schatzline about to really deter this, not just from a punishment or incarceration perspective or us versus them type of approach, but for a more holistic, sort of multi-pronged approach.
Thank you, members. The chair recognizes Representative Meza. For what purpose? You may proceed.
Thank you. So aren't there already laws on the books for driving under the influence and for involuntary manslaughter?
Yes.
And I believe we heard in previous testimony that 2 to 20 years is already on the books.
That is my understanding.
That's a pretty wide range from 2 to 20.
Sure.
I'm only can think that they must have given such a wide range so that we could take into consideration the factors of what happened. Whether we think it's not so bad, they get 2. We think it's really bad, they get 20. So it seems like we already have the flexibility in the books to address the situation. Are you familiar with the bill that's been presented here in the legislature a few times to allow people who are visiting the country, whether legally or illegally, to get a driver's license?
I am not.
Okay, so we have, can't get insurance if you don't have a driver's license. You can't get a driver's license because the state won't let them. So there's not any way to do any of that. Are you familiar with that issue?
Somewhat.
Okay. So I don't understand quite why this bill either couldn't be for everybody or it's already covered in the laws that we already have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's probably also an important point to consider. I mean, because you're talking about essentially judicial discretion in these situations that allow the judges to look at wide range from 2 to 20 and to look at the individual circumstances and to consider many of the things that Rep. Schatzline and Chair Harless have brought up in determining that person's proportionate sentence.
And in this case, the court might go for the 20. Or with somebody else, they might go for the 2. It's a big difference. So we have DUI laws on the books that applies to everybody, legally or not legally in the country. Whether some people came to Texas from somewhere else up north instead of down south, and they have to follow the same laws. So we have these laws about drunk driving, and yet we still have drunk driving. Why aren't the laws we already have about drunk driving not working? because it evidently doesn't stop people from driving drunk. So the laws we have currently are not that big a deterrent when people are in that situation. For some of us, they might think, oh, like, because we have a lot of good commercials, right, about don't drive, buzz driving is drunk driving, and turning over keys. We have a lot of those commercials, but yet it still happens. Why do you think that is?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to get at here is we don't want to be insensitive to the unimaginable loss. And obviously, these issues need to be dealt with. But to your point, Texas is not known for being lenient when it comes to these issues. And for decades, if not generations, this country has led when it comes to incarceration and sentencing. And I think what I'm hoping to bring is that we need to figure out how to sort of break out of that to where the only thing that we can come up with when we're coming to these issues is just to increase sentencing, is just to create more tough on crime policies. Like we need to think beyond that and pursue other solutions that could be helpful. And I wish I could come with some concrete answers, but again, to my point, we spent decades, if not generations, pursuing a one-size-fits-all approach to where, we gladly spend millions, if not billions of dollars on incarceration, but not on figuring out what are some other ways that we can do to address these issues, particularly with this type of offense. Because again, as I stated, if you're dealing with someone who has an intoxication manslaughter, generally speaking, that's not their first time, it's multiple, which probably means there's some types of alcohol use disorder or substance use disorder that needs to be addressed that incarceration alone will not do. And again, we are here to try and pursue long-term public safety solutions to these tragic incidents. And just respectfully ask that we think beyond sort of what we've sort of always been doing when it comes to this and other issues related to our criminal legal system.
And this bill, I notice, calls for a 10-year minimum. We already have a 20-year maximum, so that's covered. Would think the courts would take into consideration in this case that there was a prior DUI and so on, and that they wouldn't go for the minimum, they go more toward the maximum.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? If not, thank you for being here.